Welcome back. You're listening to the discussion Innovation in Government, sponsored by Carasoft on federalnewsradio.com and 1500 AM. I'm your host, Jason Miller. My guest is Dan Karayanis, the Director of Public Sector for RSA. Now, Dan, before break, we were talking about digital risk management. We started to get into some of the other trends you're seeing, resiliency, CDM. But there's another, if you will, emerging issue that's starting to come up in the federal sector, and something called quantitative risk management. Let's start there. Talk a little bit about what that is and how are you seeing it becoming more important to people in government.
So this concept of quantitative risk management is quite interesting. It is another dimension of how organizations, predominantly right now in the commercial market, but we're seeing it more emerging in the government market space, are putting another factor on the table in how they think about risk. You know, most people think about risk in the old days, it's, red, yellow, green, or it's a factor 1 to 10, on a scale. What's the prioritization of a risk? Using very sophisticated algorithms in some cases. This concept of quantitative risk management really is starting to associate a cost factor to that risk. So what's the cost to me to address something that's deemed a high priority or a vulnerability that needs to be addressed? What's the cost to me if I don't do that and something bad were to happen? An example of that might be I have to apply a simple patch across my enterprise. Maybe I've got 5,000 boxes that need to be patched. They weren't patched. The cost to me to patch that might have been a weekend's worth of effort. Maybe I've got a contractor on site, 3 or 4 people doing some work. What's the cost of that? The cost of me not doing it and, we were breached. And now a lot of sensitive data of my employees as well as the public that I serve is now out there. And now I have to provide funding for all those individuals for the next year to protect them because their information is now in the wild. Or reputational cost and impact. If you think about it from a federal government, maybe a little bit different than a Facebook, but think about the reputational impact of Facebook with this recent amount of information that was out there. One of the challenges, I think, for Facebook, you have a stock drop. They had an impact there. You have people that are now discontinuing Facebook entirely. So you have individual advertisers. So there's a lot of interesting elements of this quantitative risk management. I think we'll see more and more of this in the federal market space to come.
It's almost the idea of, okay, what are our risks? Where they sit on the priority list, and what's the cost to fix them versus the cost if we don't fix them? That seems to be very difficult to do and very time consuming when you have this list of risks. It's almost like, why am I going to go through this process? I should just fix them. So what's the value and how quickly can you understand the qualitative and quantitative values?
Well, think about it. If you were sitting at the highest level within an organization and you had 25 risks that were characterized as critical risks, and so now I have to start making some decisions. Maybe another factor I might think about is the cost to change something. Well, if I spend an inconsequential amount of money to address 2 of them and I really reduced my risk profile significantly, maybe a good investment. Also, it would be nice to know that if I didn't spend an inconsequential amount of money and the impact to me could be significant, that might also impact my decision. So, but Jason, you make a really good point. Someone needs to go through the process of thinking about this. Someone needs to go, what's the various cost elements to doing that? And there are tools and capabilities that are out there now. RSA does a bit of this ourselves. We can help organizations understand this from yet another dimension, which is the cost dimension. In a commercial market, people have been doing this for a while. You kind of think about the insurance industry. This is kind of, the basis model, if you will, from an actuarial perspective of how insurance companies do what they do. It's just taking that concept and applying it to, well, in our case today, thinking about cyber risk, that type of thing.
I think that's helpful to know that there are tools out there, because I could just imagine an agency, and you can pick your agency to go, where do we start? If you think about a mission like Commerce Department or a mission like Interior, there's so many different pieces and parts to it. What are you seeing in the federal market around this? Like, are agencies just taking a slice of it and starting obviously small? That seems to be the trend. Yeah,
we were actually, I can think of one agency off the top of my head. We've been working with them for a while. They've taken this concept to heart. They are associating a cost to the IT assets that they have they're associating the risk weight that those assets and the how they're used to support their mission, what the potential impact to those would be. They're actually using this model to also help them plan for the future. So think of a CIO and a CFO, the concept of those two, and how they might now work together, collaborate together to start to think about, hey, we need to sunset the following systems, the following applications. These are legacy applications that were custom built 25 years ago. How do we get rid of these things and update our risk model in a very, very good way? I'm reducing risk because I've put some other capabilities out there. So understanding the quantitative elements of this is important. And we're seeing some agencies start to embrace this.
And I think with the push for IT modernization, we can't have a conversation without bringing up IT modernization, of course. I think that your agencies are starting to step back and go, I know what my high value assets are. Okay, then what do I need to do to make sure that those are protected from a security perspective, but also what's my risk associated with them? As you said, if a high value asset is a client server running on a box, Windows 95, that's a bigger risk than a client server running on a Windows 10, as an example.
Exactly. That's exactly right. I think you hit it right on the head, Jason. It's just, understanding what I have to support my mission, to support my employees, as well as the public I serve. And in addition to that, starting to understand the cost of managing that near term and the cost to me as an organization if something were to happen long term if I don't do something to reduce its risk profile.
Dan, you brought up the CDM program, the Homeland Security Department's Continuous Diagnostics and Mitigation. One of my favorite things to write about, to report upon. I've been following it since it launched back in 2008, 2009 timeframe. Give me a sense of RSA's role in it. You guys are providing the dashboard, I know that, but give me an update if you can.
Yeah. Actually, I've been reading a lot of what you've been producing around CDM as well.
Hopefully you learned something.
Yeah, I did. I
hope.
Actually,
I try a little bit.
You've been very good about it. So RSA, we're honored and pleased to be a part of the CDM program. We are the dashboard element of that program. We work with that prime contractor, MTV, Metric Team Venture, who is the responsible party for initial dashboard rollout and the subsequent releases. They've gone through 4 successive releases. So it continues to evolve in terms of the dashboard and its capability. The dashboard has been rolled out to all the various primes who have responsibilities for groups A through F. And those primes are actively involved in not only deploying the dashboard in their infrastructure, but rolling data up to it so that agencies on up to the federal dashboard level have visibility to what's going on. And I think if you were to have the CDM folks, if they're in the room with us here, I think they'd be very pleased with the progress they're making. Some of the folks there have been working very, very hard. And I know this gets looked at quite a bit. You write about it yourself, but a lot of activity has been occurring and good progress has been made.
I got a chance to catch up with Kevin Cox, who runs the CDM program for DHS just recently. And he had talked about not only do all the CFO Act agencies now have their dashboard, but he hopes by early June timeframe, maybe mid-June, everyone will be reporting up to the federal dashboard as well. So I think those are signs that the progress is real and it's being made. Do you get a sense of the difference it's making? I've written about, for instance, WannaCry, and we're going to get into ransomware in a second, but it seems like CDM value came through during this WannaCry event last year.
I don't know if you talked to Kevin about that, but in reality...
Talk to Jeanette Manfra about it.
There you go.
Yeah, a little better.
So in reality, they actually used elements of CDM last year when that WannaCry attack occurred. So they, with the information that they had at the time, they didn't have everything, but with the information that was gathered within the various CDM deployments, they were able to quickly determine what were those assets that were at risk, quickly generate a report, and roll that report out so people could get to it. And I think just at the very beginning, interesting that they were able to see how they could benefit almost immediately from it. I think we'll see more of that to come. But I know Kevin and his team, Betsy Kulik, a bunch of folks there have been working very, very hard on the program, and we think they're making great progress. And as I said, we're honored to be a part of the program. And
it's a great segue to our one of our last topics of the conversation around ransomware. You brought that up earlier, business resilience, because as we've talked about for years, it's not a matter of if, but it's a matter of when you get breached. So you need that resilience. Maybe talk a little bit about the ransomware issue and how how continuous monitoring and resiliency fits into this broader discussion?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, the government marketplace is numero uno, target number one. I mean, that's it really is. As some surveys and reports that came out last year kind of continually validate that hacktivists, criminals, even state governments are actively after our government organizations, not just federal, but also state and local. If you think about the federal marketplace, government agencies maybe have more resources than a state. States maybe have more resources than a city or a county. I mean, I think we all read recently about a large city in the southeast that was subject to a ransomware attack. So you think about that. What was their resiliency plan around that? Unfortunate reality is, a lot of their services got shut down to the public they serve. And it would be nice if they could just tell a ransomware a hacktivist, hey, go ahead and take whatever you want. We already have a backup of everything in another data center. We'll be online in 24 hours and have a nice day. So I think more and more now, organizations, again, back to saying about resiliency, are thinking about that. How do I ensure that I'm resilient? If I can't back up everything, how do I back up, to your point earlier about my critical assets and the critical data elements that people need access to? How do I at least make sure that those are in a place where I can quickly flip a switch? I'm resilient, I'm up in 24, 48 hours, and I can continue to provide services to my employees, and I can provide services to the public that I serve. So big topic, hot topic. If I could digress.
Please.
We're seeing this internationally as well from an RSA perspective. This is not a U.S. government or a U.S. market phenomenon. Both in Europe and in Asia, ongoing attacks are occurring. And so this concept of being better prepared, understanding where I'm most vulnerable or could be most vulnerable at risk, and putting resilience plans in place, and also enforcing that my suppliers, my supply chain, if I've outsourced, that they're doing the same. Very, very important.
Dan, one of the things you bring up is this idea of resiliency, and we've talked about it a little bit. When I talk to other CIOs and other leaders in the technology community, the cloud always brings up that's the resilience piece. Is there more than just, hey, move stuff to the cloud because that's how you get resilient? Is there what's the cyber piece of it, resiliency, or what's the broader perspective around it? Is it more than just, again, the cloud?
I think it is maybe a little bit more than just a cloud. I mean, at the end of the day, most agencies are continually driving and moving applications out to the cloud, again, to serve the public as well as their employees. I think most of those are doing that for a cost management perspective. Most of them are doing that because they want to be able to provide better services as well. So there's a combination of things. But that means they also need to make sure that where they're putting that information, it can live in a very secure way, so people can access it securely. So a cloud is a very, very good thing, whether it's a private cloud or I've got something out in the public cloud, whether I'm using applications that are out there and available for me through a software as a service, application as a service. Those are all important. But again, underneath the covers, somebody needs to be careful about the ongoing security controls that are put in place by those providers. It's critically important.
Dan, this has been a fascinating conversation. We're just about out of time. Before I let you go, talk a little bit about the future when we want to tag back to the beginning of digital risk management. Where should agencies start? What should they do? What's some of the advice you would give them, or what's some of the potholes they should avoid? Because I think a lot of times people will listen to this and go, okay, great, something else for me to do. But this is bigger than just something else for someone to do.
Well, yeah, I think at the end of the day, if you're a government leader, this is your responsibility, to not only to your employees, but to the general public as well. I think maybe one good place to start is, a couple things. One, I think the concept of what we call within RSA a risk register, just the idea of creating a risk register and identifying across your enterprise all the risks factors that an agency and organization needs to think about. You have personnel risks, you have IT cyber risk. We've been talking about that quite a bit. You could have physical security risk. You might have supplier risk. So there are all kinds of factors that come into play. And so creating this risk register of those things that are most important to the organization, and underneath those starting to build out compensating controls or plans to make sure that I reduce, or at least I track those risks, the metrics associated with those risks, needing to be able to do that on an ongoing basis. I think another area around risk management is, I hate to say it, but just employee awareness of what's going on. I mean, we talked about ransomware a little bit earlier. Just ensuring that my general population, who's working with the public's information, understands basically what terrorists and what other individual organizations are doing out there, and how I can be more mindful, more careful, so not put my agency at risk. But really, at the end of the day, I think from a executive leadership perspective, it's conducting an initial assessment and building out that risk register and starting to apply metrics to it.
Very good. Great advice. And unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. Let me thank my guest, Dan Karianis, the Director of Public Sector for RSA. Dan, thank you so much for taking the time today.
Jason, it was a pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
You've been listening to the discussion Innovation in Government, sponsored by Carahsoft on federalnewsradio.com and 1500 AM. I've been your host, Jason Miller. For more on this discussion, visit federalnewsradio.com and search innovation.